We're going to open this session, and the person on my left, if you were watching the Q&A the other day, he had prime position in the audience. I know that he was hoping to be on the panel, and had he been on the panel, it would have been a much more meaningful discussion. But notwithstanding, he did get his point across, and if you were also fortunate enough to witness the preceding article about Nick Minchin, former senator, and Rosie, the young lady that went around the world and did the opposing views on sceptical or in favour of climate change due to mankind's intervention. It was a great program, and that had no positive outcome. I think we could conclude from that that in terms of climate change, there's still a large number of people, but a smaller number of scientists who still think it's not happening as a function of mankind's intervention. But there is an overwhelming support from the scientific department that man's contribution to pollution is in fact causing global warming. Or let me put that more accurately, is adding to accelerating the rate of global warming as opposed to natural causes that we have no control over whatsoever. And I'm not here to try and be a climatologist, a scientist, and I don't believe Matthew is going to try and be one of those. But what there is common ground, the absolute need to reduce our carbon footprint as we go about our everyday life. And we have to recognise that the fossil fuels that we are using is finite. It's not sustainable at the rate that we're using it. We must find alternatives. And Matthew has his position as Executive Director of Carbon Zero, or Zero Carbon, a non-profit organisation, has dedicated himself and his supporters to finding a solution and advocating a solution that if we all were able to convince our political partners to unite, we would in fact achieve the reductions in carbon emissions. And to tell you how to do that, I'm handing over to Matthew.
I'm very appreciative to be invited by Don, and obviously far more esteemed than I am, so I'll do my best to match and live up to sort of me approaching the man here. It's been very impressive. So thank you for bringing me, and thank you all for coming. So I'm from Beyond Zero Emissions, and it's a little bit complicated, which is why Don was stumbling over the name, and that's because our charitable institution, so recognised by the Australian Tax Office, is called Beyond Zero Emissions, but we actually we're a research organisation, but you'd class us, I guess, as an environment group. We're the only environment group I know of that has an official research partnership with the university, and we've got that with the University of Melbourne Energy Research Institute and the University of Melbourne Sustainable Societies Institute and the University of Melbourne Social Justice Initiative, and shortly with the NOSL Institute of Global Health. So, and we're also working on a relationship which hopefully will sign shortly with the University of Queensland. So our project together, the partnership project, is called Zero Carbon Australia. That's our research project, and Beyond Zero Emissions is all our activities, our research project plus our advocacy work. So I'm going to tell you about the Zero Carbon Australia project and our work to replace the energy supply system, which is the biggest contributor to carbon emissions, with renewable energy sources, which are zero carbon. So if you can imagine, smokestacks and tailpipes today tend to contribute carbon dioxide. Well, the idea of zero carbon is to have minimal or no smokestacks and tailpipes. So that's sort of the broad overview. So think of no smokestacks and tailpipes. So we're going to go through the need, the technology, the reliability of the technology, the resources, the jobs, issues, the economics, and then we'll look at the social and political will and what we can do. And I hope they're not standing in the way. If anybody's seeing feel free to move around if that's an issue. So the organisation is Beyond Zero Emissions. We actually do research and communications. We're completely independent. We're a pro bono. We get pro bono contributions. So our organisation has about 12 staff, 5 researchers at Melbourne University, but we have about 500 volunteers. So we actually have volunteers doing research. So I think that's relatively unique. And so we've actually drawn in people from the engineering fields, physicists, people from all different areas. Here's an idea. This is our launch at Melbourne Uni. So we've got their production line manager at Toyota Motor Company. We've got people who work at the Australian Energy Market Operator. We've got people who work at large fossil fuel companies like BHP Billiton, and in their own time they're contributing to writing our research. And a lot of them, especially the young ones, they're trying to create the future they want to live and work in. So today they might work for a fossil fuel company, but they actually want to work in a 21st century clean tech economy sort of job. They don't actually want to work in the old 19th century fossil fuel economy, but there aren't those opportunities available. So what they're doing is they're working with us to try and design that future, and hopefully the politics will follow, and they'll be able to move into that job that they wish to be in. So the project itself is a blueprint for Zero Carbon Australia. It's blueprint one scenario for going to 100% renewable. I've actually turned my screen off to save power on the laptops. That's why I kept looking back. I'm sorry. It probably would last, but I didn't want to risk it. So, fully accept the climate science. It specifies only commercial off-the-shelf technology, and a key thing that we want to do is maintain or enhance key social and environmental indicators. So we don't want it to be actually going backwards. So if we write a proposal, we want it to actually be going forward. So we don't want to decide we're going to allocate all of our gross domestic product to building renewables and have nothing for feeding people, or as an exaggerated case, like we actually want to enhance Australia's prosperity in the process. So we don't want to compromise food and water security or our standards of living. So we've actually got a number of plans, and the first one that we've released, which I haven't got a copy of the book here, but you can download a PDF of it for free or buy it online at our website, beyondzeroemissions.org, or at Melbourne University's website. It's stationary energy from electricity from power stations. So stationary energy are things that aren't mobile, so not transport sources, but things that are fixed assets that are powered with electricity, like aluminium smelters, lights, projectors, laptops, microwaves, anything that's electricity that's connected, plus stationary gas sources. So we're actually looking at all energy, not just energy that's used for electricity today, but all stationary energy. We're endorsed by various people like General Peter Gratian, former Chief of Defence, Sir Gustav Nossel, Nobel Laureate, Peter, just forgot, no one knew Peter, someone I know, Peter Doherty, got that, sorry. And former Australian Chief Scientist Robin Batterham, and so on. And that's our stationary energy plan, and we had placeholders for each sector of the economy because they're all interconnected, but we couldn't write one master volume because we'd never get it out the door. So in about 2 months we're going to release our business plan, and I'll be able to come back and present that to you if you'd like that in a few months or so. Sorry? A new church? Okay. Yeah, buildings plan. We've got a transport plan we're hoping to get out at the end of the year or the beginning of next year, and a land use plan coming up. And in the future, when we have capacity, so we don't have enough funding to be able to run these projects, we want to do an industrial processes plan, so that's like steel and cement making, and Australia a renewable energy superpower, so how we can replace fossil fuel export revenue. So taking into account the economics and the impact of where the hole we've got ourselves into at the moment with coal and gas mining. So part one, and Edith, I'll just rush through this because I wasn't going to be a climate scientist, but this is a chart, and a lot of people charts just look fuzzy. This is actually from the Potsdam Institute, which is in Berlin. And Professor Hans-Joachim Schellnhuber, he's Angela Merkel's climate advisor and the advisor to the EU. And he shows that even if you don't take into account historic carbon emissions, and you take 2010 as a baseline year and you allocate a carbon budget to have a statistical likelihood of not exceeding 2 degrees Celsius, which they decided was like a guardrail of, a safe climate that we can predict sort of the outcome for an agricultural based society, so we don't end up in difficult living conditions. If we allocated everyone 6 point something tonnes of CO2 per annum for every person on Earth, then the United States would need to be decarbonised by about 2020, which is relatively soon. And Australia is has a slightly greater carbon footprint than the US. So there's a rather pertinent problem. Okay? Now, if you're Burkina Faso and you hadn't actually emitted anything, then they're saying, well, you could actually sort of rise your emissions, but you wouldn't really want to do that to that economy. You'd want to hope that we could actually share with them all the technology and all the know-how so they can leapfrog, these developing countries can leapfrog developing via old coal and gas and other 19th century fossil fuel-based things. So part two, I'm just going to talk about the technology we've got today. So traditional power generation, most of it is steam-based. So you've basically got a boiler which you burn something under, and you can burn coal or gas, or you can, there are some variations on this, but we'll keep it simple, or you can stick uranium under there, and that creates a kettle that's sort of really well sealed, gets a bit excited, and when the steam gets forced, the only way steam can get out of that top of that kettle, whistling away, is via the spinning blades. Like you can only get out if those blades spin, because that's what's happening as it forces through there, and that drives and you get electric light. So, and that's how you get the heat. You do coal mining. That's a conversion technology. That's a coal-fired power plant. But you can take that heat source away and you can put any other heat source you want there. So it doesn't have to be coal. And so this is an alternative to the heat source. So down the bottom here you've got the same coal-fired power plant, but this is called a solar thermal plant, and these can be in a base load or a peaking configuration. So which means that they can run solar power all through the night, solar power around the clock, 24-hour solar power. And you've got a series of mirrors, and these are giant mirrors, 130 square metres, focusing light to the top of the tower, and I'll show you a diagram of how it works, and they can store their heat for night time, so they can actually store the sun's energy as a thermal battery, so like a thermos flask, not like an electrical battery in your car, but a thermos flask battery. So here, I've got a diagram of the plant. There's a central tower surrounded by a sea of mirrors, a field of mirrors, and each of those mirrors individually tracks depending on where the sun is in the sky to make sure that the light is bouncing. So imagine you're trying to get the light, or your watch, you're trying to make sure it hits the same spot. So all these mirrors are trying to hit the same spot, and this tower is exactly the same as a coal-fired power station smokestack, but there's no smoke coming out of the top. And at the bottom of the tower is like 40,000 tonnes of salt distributed across 2 tanks. And the tank at the beginning of the day that's full is the cold salt tank, and it's 286 degrees cold. And inside it's industrial fertiliser, so potassium nitrate and sodium nitrate in a binary mix. So just what's used on farms, so there's no special EPA approvals or whatever. It's a closed loop, you don't keep recharging it, only when the plant is commissioned do you put the salt in there. And the salt then gets pumped up the top of the tower. The light from all those mirrors, and boy, it's a lot of heat, gets concentrated on what's called the receiver, and Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney make the receiver. It's a special super alloy called Inconel, so it's very high temperature stuff. And then the salt falls down into the hot tank. So the cold tank empties during the day and the hot tank fills up, and then any time, day or night, so it can be storing solar energy and not actually generating. Any time of day or night, the salt can be returned to the cold tank, say in the middle of the night, via a heat exchanger, a shell and tube heat exchanger, where there's water running past it, and the water then flashes to steam, and then that steam is then forced through the blades of the turbine, like in the previous diagram, and you've got electricity. So that's your burning of your coal on that side, and then as soon as you get to the heat exchanger, it's exactly the same as a coal-fired power plant. So for utilities, it's an easy drop-in replacement, provided they're installed in a location that has a pretty good solar resource. okay? Because if you installed them in the Latrobe Valley, they wouldn't work so well because I know New Zealand's called the land of the long white cloud, but they borrowed a bit of that for the Latrobe Valley as well, okay? So this is one of the mirrors, 130 square metres, and if a stray of that gets on my neck, it was like burning hot. So that's just one sun reflected onto my neck. So I've got getting the sun from the sun plus, which is two suns, one from the sun and one from the mirror. That's enough to burn you. But you can imagine these fields are made of 10,000 or 17,000 mirrors, so they're really hot. And that's myself, Rebecca Dunn at ANU. She's Australia's only solar thermal storage PhD candidate. And Patrick from Melbourne University, he's our first zero carbon research fellow at the University of Melbourne. He used to work at the ExxonMobil refinery, but decided he didn't enjoy that. So that's what the power plant looks like when it's operating. This is called Torresol's Gema Solar, which is between Cordoba and Sevilla in Spain. So it's on the Alta Via between Cordoba and Sevilla, and so you can see that today. Or if you find Granada or Sevilla, you can't miss it. It's the tallest structure in Andalusia. And I took Ross Garneau, who was the advisor to the government on climate change, and Tony Windsor, who's the independent MP. And when I was on Q&A the other night, I got a SMS from Tony saying, "Don't worry about Clive, he's stuck in the past, you'll win, Matthew." So that was encouraging. That's Ross's wife there, Jane. And so yeah, this is a diagram showing you what I explained before ahead of time. So instead of temperatures, they're 290 in the cold tank, 565 at the top of the tower, 565 at the base of the tower. Immediate R&D is going to lead to this rising to 600-700 degrees C, and then it becomes sort of unstable. In the future, talking further away, these plants will be able to operate at 1100, 1200, 1300 degrees, and that'll actually increase the output by 50% for the same amount of concrete, steel and glass. Okay? And that's what the potassium nitrate looks like. You wouldn't want to inject it, but you can hold it and maybe lick your fingers, but you don't want to go past that. So it's not great for you, but you know it's not it doesn't need any special licensing. That's the molten salt tanks. And you see that they've got a half a metre of mineral wool around them and have very low losses because it's a very small amount of surface area versus the volume and bulk of salt. And that's the tank. The same as the ExxonMobil refinery's got 40 of those. They're just the cold tank's just a carbon steel tank, and the hot tank's actually a stainless tank, a bit more expensive. You can see the plant there. But it's only the beginning because they're building a much bigger plant. That one was 20 megawatts, and they'll never build another 20 megawatt one because you don't get the economies of scale. This is a 110 megawatt plant being built in Tonopah, Nevada, and so it'll be operating next year, and they'll keep scaling these to 220 megawatts, at which point there's too much losses from the light on the outside mirrors. So globally, there's quite a lot of solar thermal with storage under construction, not going as well as rooftop PV, and the reason being is these plants need all the conventional approval processes and planning processes, and they need a lot of finance during the build time. The reason PV, or rooftop solar, known as PV or photovoltaic, is doing so well is because it gets stamped out in factories, and the Chinese are very good at doing that times 10 over what the Germans did, and it's deployed on rooftops without the need for cumbersome and planning approvals and all that sort of stuff. So it has meant that industry has just boomed really quickly versus any conventional power, whether it be this renewable stuff or even wind projects are a bit halfway. They can be constructed very quickly, but they still need all the planning, cumbersome planning and so on. But the solar plants are in that boat, while rooftop PV is not. So that's why rooftop PV is coming down so fast. It's dropped in price by more than 50% in the last 2 years, whereas this solar thermal technology hasn't. It's come down about 15%. So these are the locations that are good. The dark red is not as good, and the lighter areas are better. So you can see Australia's in a prime position to use solar thermal. So So at this stage, just say it's our choice. We can choose to install 1 square metre of mirror surface and not burn 20 tonnes of coal over the economic life of that mirror. And if they do a good job with the mirror, it could last for twice as long. Or we can choose to burn 20 tonnes of coal and not use the mirror, and that includes the energy embodied in the production of the mirror. Our plan also includes wind, because wind is the cheapest form of renewable and very fast to deploy and very available if you make a decision to go with it. These are 7.5 megawatt wind turbines, and they're the biggest in the world that you can buy onshore. And the interesting thing about them is that to the human eye, no difference between a 2 megawatt, 5 megawatt or a 7.5 megawatt turbine, because there's no reference on the horizon. So provided you don't sit it next to something else, they look the same as the smaller turbines. So my argument is build bigger ones and less of them. Because some people don't like the sight of them. I love them, but I think they're great. And I'll tell you, I was a pig in shit there. I was so happy. They wouldn't let me climb up the. So.
Where is that, Matthew?
Oh, sorry. That's at Estenes or Esteens wind farm in Belgium near the German border. And it's actually built next to a coal mine. And all those coal mine areas have all closed down, and they've just gone and built wind turbines there. And there's now a massive wind farm with 400 of these. This other one's only got 13. There's a massive wind farm with 400 of these being built in Sweden, which is my next trip. So, and hopefully they'll let me climb up one of those.
Just while you're on that, it's interesting to note that the blades on those wind turbines are built by a warship builder just adjacent to the factory. And it's now found that it's far more profitable to build those sort of blades for the world than warships.
And I mean, I could talk the leg off an iron pot, or I could talk all day, but I'll just mention something about wind. In Brazil now, they took, and obviously labour costs are a bit lower in some countries, so that can affect the cost of projects and also how planning regimes and all that sort of stuff. But in Brazil, they had bids from any power vendor, gas, wind, whatever, and the wind turbine delivered electricity came in cheapest. So, and that was just, and then the government issued the tenders to build wind. So out of something like 50 projects they tendered for, and they built about 5 gas ones, 2 solar ones, and the rest were wind. So, well, they're still building them, sorry. The tenders were won last year. So global investments increased 30% per annum. China has a plan of 200 gigawatts by 2020. So our complete sort of peak requirement across Australia is about 50 gigawatts of power, which has about a 50% utilisation. China has a target of 200 gigawatts, which will have about a 25% utilisation. So it's a pretty impressive amount of wind. They're all out in a hurry. Obviously, it's a big country. But they're actually going for a terawatt or 1 million megawatts by 2050, which will lead to 18% of their total energy demand coming from wind. So when people sort of say wind turbines don't make any power, well, supplying 18% of China's power is pretty significant. And something I'll mention is that every renewable energy target that China's ever had, they've significantly exceeded. So that's their current target. And if the history is anything to go by, it'll be something greater than that. Because they had a 2020 target originally of 40 gigawatts, which changed to 60 gigawatts, which changed to 100 gigawatts, which changed to 150 gigawatts, and the current version of it is 200 gigawatts. So, and that all happened in the last 5 years, those ramping up the target. So, Denmark's going 50% wind power by 2020, and they're interconnected into the sort of northeast European grid there. And but that's 50% wind power. They're currently 26% wind power in Denmark, and there's one place of interest that is the same amount of wind, and that's South Australia. And South Australia is currently running 26% wind. And South Australian electricity prices are now, they used to be far above the rest of the country, and the price projections for next year for South Australia, they're only like less than, I think it's like 1% above the rest of the country. So South Australian prices, although all our prices in Australia are probably expensive, our retail tariffs, South Australian prices are now in kilter with the rest of the country, and they've gone 26% wind. So who's backing this? Rolls-Royce, GE, Pratt & Whitney. ACS is the biggest builder of solar thermal plants, and interestingly, they own a company called Hochtief, and Hochtief is a German construction company. ACS is the biggest Spanish construction company, and Hochtief controls Latent Holdings. So if they can make them in Spain, we can make them here with the company that's owned by the company that makes them in Spain. Okay, we're going to need 325 terawatt hours, which just means a lot of energy, a year in 2020, up from 230 terawatt hours today. And under our plan, we have this business as usual electricity use. We have a huge energy efficiency mining program. So we mine, we mine iron ore, and we mine bauxite, and we mine this and that other mineral. We can mine energy efficiency. It's just another mining effort, more quite an intellectual sort of job to find the vectors for savings. So we actually use less electricity for our current electricity uses. But we actually, but even though we do that, if you look at Germany, we're currently using 7 megawatt hours per head of population. We're using 11 at the moment. Germany will be using less than what we projected in our plan as our target in our scenario. So, and the Germans, by interest, are actually expanding their aluminium industry at the moment. So, but they do more downstream processing. So we're going to find efficiency savings, like in 3 years payback, they've got a 38% reduction in energy use in the Empire State Building. As an example of a retrofit of an old building that can be done, triple glazed windows and so on. But in our plan, the reason we're actually expanding electricity demand is because we're switching space heat by using renewable ambient heat, so heat pumps, and transport electrification. So there's our current present delivered energy. Much of it comes from oil. That's the bit that mostly decreases. Transport electrification is the biggest energy saver. Internal combustion engine cars are pretty inefficient, and trucks. Space heat, which a lot of that comes from renewable heat, existing bioenergy, and then under our scenario in 2020. Now, we're in 2012, and we wrote this a couple of years ago. It probably needs to be a decade plan. It might be the 2022 plan now. It's getting a bit ambitious to try and finish something like this in less than a decade. Fast forward through that. Okay, and here's a look at the actual outcome in the plan. We've got a mix of concentrated solar, wind power, and an upgraded electricity grid. I'll show you that now. So that's the concentrated solar power sites, 12 of them. Each of the scaling up to 220 megawatt towers, 17 of those, so 17 smokestacks with no smoke at each of the sites. And 60% of our stationary energy delivered power from the grid. And we've actually launched it all around those locations. It's very popular in the rural communities. Kalgoorlie love it. And there's sort of like a local action group there. There's one in Port Augusta now. We had an ABC Radio National story on AM the other morning, which you can find on the internet, where we've got the local council in Port Augusta, the Mayor Joy Belush, the local Liberal member, hoping to get the opposition all together on side. That's the Port Augusta project, ABC News. Wind power, 6,500 of those wind turbines, each at 23 sites will do the job. There's actually not many wind turbines. There's 3,000 wind turbines in Denmark, and Denmark fits geographically 5 times into Victoria. So we could certainly host 6,500 wind turbines. And a little bit of biomass co-firing. So there's the existing electricity grid today. There's a high voltage DC upgrade to the grid in red, and there's all our solar and wind sites. So this is the renewable energy system we could have in a decade if we chose to do so. And the SKM designed our grid for us, which was they have like a sort of a philanthropic program, which was good. And I'll just quickly show you the modelling, and then we'll go to questions. So we've got, and this is wind power coming in. It's a lot more choppy than in reality because we only had real hub height data for Victorian and Tasmanian and South Australian wind sites. For our next version, our next update to this, which we're going to do next year, we've got non-disclosure agreements with some wind companies to get hub height data for New South Wales and Queensland. And the interesting thing is that Queensland has better wind in winter, which helps, as you'll see in a sec. There's our concentrating solar thermal plants operating directly from the sun, just dispatching electricity from the molten salt tanks. And we built a bit of biomass co-firing with the molten salt. So we've got an atmospheric pressure furnace, which heats the molten salt from biomass pellets that we transport to the site at half of the solar thermal plants. Now, we could have actually done it all with renewables, but we have to build a huge amount of overcapacity, which would have a much bigger capital cost than have biomass co-firing. So with the biomass co-firing, we didn't need to pay for additional steam turbines or all the other balance of plant equipment. We could just do a bypass loop on the salt. So we see it's a big manufacturing construction job. 600,000 heliostats a year. Does anyone know how many cars we manufacture a year and how many we buy? Well, the number of cars we manufacture keeps going down, but something like 200,000. And the number of cars we buy is 1 million. 600,000 heliostats is a jolly sight easier to manufacture than a car, okay? Because they've got a drive mechanism which needs to be pretty robust and long-lasting, but the rest of it's just a structure that you make as light as you can while maintaining integrity of it and the glass, the silvered mirror glass on top. And 30 concrete towers, it takes 6 weeks to wet pour a concrete tower. And wind turbine factory, 4 factories the size of this one, they built in 1 year in Portugal will do the job. So we could actually host those factories in Australia if we decided we wanted to do that, or we can import the turbines, or we can do half-half, it's up to us. So 8% of the nation's current concrete use would be required. About 20% of the nation's current steel use would be required. However, if you take into account net steel from iron ore exports, it's just a sliver. We looked at silver, bauxite, or aluminium production, all those things. Jobs-wise, you can see the jobs in all the manufacturing side is about 80,000, and then the construction pulse there at 160,000 jobs. And in terms of the economy, there's mining at 190,000 jobs. I think it's risen to about 200,000 now. Construction, manufacturing, professional scientific services, those are all the relevant sectors. And there's our build of the spatial energy plan. So we do have the labour availability. It's not redirecting the whole economy like in a war or something. And so it would cost $37 billion a year over 10 years to do this. So if you want to think in scary terms, you could think an NPN a year, that's what people use against us when they're attacking us. Or you could think of it in terms of house insurance at $38 billion, or insurance in general. And it's far more likely climate's going to be a problem than your house burning down. And I asked that of Nick Minchin the other night. I said, do you insure your house? Because he was talking about, we can only do this if we're sure. And I said to him afterwards, again, we're having drinks, I said, do you insure your house? So, which he does, apparently, even though he's got less than a 1 in 100 year chance of it burning down. Gambling's at $20 billion. Alcohol, we spend $50 billion on new cars. So all those things, $37 billion is not a lot to pay for insurance for the future. And so all we need now is social and political will. So we're trying to get that by going around the country delivering these talks. And we have a speakers program. We've got 200 people who have trained up to give a talk similar to mine. And we do that at Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, church groups, scout groups, schools, any audience anywhere, town halls. So you can donate, or you can contribute, or you can do both even better as a volunteer. So I'll open it to questions now. And throw it over. Thanks. 1, 2, 3.
In your graph, you showed biomass making up the shortfall.
Yes.
I didn't see any mention of hydroelectric. I'm personally concerned that biomass has still got carbon emissions that aren't a lot different from traditional methods.
Yep.
Not to mention the impact on native forests in some places. Have you got an opinion on that?
Yep. So we are very much for seriously reducing the amount of biomass or near eliminating it. If we found a way to build the system, or our better modelling showed that you wouldn't actually need the biomass, we would still build a biomass contingency at some of the solar thermal plants, because there's always something that can happen that you can't predict, even with the best modelling. So you'd always have that as a sort of a resiliency, a contingency measure. In terms of our biomass, we modelled pelletisation of 15% of the nation's wheat crop residuals, or that's a proxy for how much biomass required. So you wouldn't necessarily get it all from wheat, although you might stick to one crop because that might be optimisation of your furnaces in terms of how they're actually operating and the scrubbing and things like that. So I'm in agreement with you that burning stuff as minimum as possible is a good idea. The biomass feedstock we think is the least impact one, and the reason we would not go with a plan of more biomass than that, and there is one other, University of New South Wales, so this is the Melbourne Uni Beyond Zero Emissions plan. The University of New South Wales have a 100% renewable plan as well, and they have 15% biomass burning. Ours is less than 2% of the power from the solar thermal plants, so 1 point something percent of the total power is from biomass. The UNSW plan is 15%, which means they could get all the nation's sugar crop residuals, all the nation's corn residuals, and all the nation's wheat residuals. Now, I have an issue with that because of nutrient stripping, the logistics of that, it's fairly high embodied energy, and what we actually need potentially in the future is biomass for is industrial processes. So if we're going to make steel through hot briquettes or direct reduced iron, or if we're going to need to reform methane into other stuff, we're going to need biomass for that. So that's why I'm actually very much against the City of Sydney's tri-generation proposal, or any of the tri-generation proposals, where they're actually bringing burning gas back into cities, which it actually goes against 100 years of actually getting pollution out of cities. We started with coal-fired power plants. There was one down by a theatre somewhere on the street corner when Melbourne was originally put together, and it was powering some lighting. And we don't have coal-fired power plants in the basement anymore. We've got them out, hopefully, where there's less people. So I'm against burning things generally, and I think that we kept that as much as possible as a major target of the program, was to not make things so expensive. I mean, people think it's ridiculous at the moment at $370 billion. I don't think it's decent, but if we tried to get rid of that, we might have had to pay an overbuild of like 25% of the entire grid, which would have been very expensive, whereas this option only costs something like $7 billion, which on $370 billion isn't a lot. Yeah, so that's the reason we went there.
From your diagram of the various energy sources, future energy sources, it looks like most of the wind power is concentrated in Victoria. Is that correct?
Oh, no. Back. The biggest concentration of wind power is in South Australia, I think. And quite a bit in Victoria too, yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sites. So 4 in, that's just in South Australia as well. So 4 sites in Victoria, in Western Victoria. But I think that's fine. It's a good use of Victoria. Got a very good wind resource. And
I'm from Western Victoria, so that's about.
Yep.
Yeah, near where I'm from. So.
Yep.
But
At the moment, the Victorian government's pretty much, the neoliberal government's outlawed wind power from Victoria by putting a 2 kilometre, anyone can object limit around a wind turbine. People in Latrobe Valley or in Bacchus Marsh, or where there's gas mining licences and coal mining licences, don't have any veto right at all. They can just be under their house. No wind turbine has ever been put up on someone's property where they didn't want it. Like they all got paid and they volunteered to have turbines on their property. So there's definitely a double standard at the moment, where the successive governments we've had are pro-fossil fuels and anti-wind. The good thing about a wind turbine is that in the future it can be knocked down and removed, whereas if you go with coal mining, you're never returning that landscape to any existing use or anything like what it was. And you're also, for coal mining, for instance, the biggest source of mercury into the atmosphere. And one of the original drivers for me to get involved in this was when I saw an anti-wind rally back in 2001. That was for the east of the state. my brother's the head of cardiothoracic surgery and surgical oncology at St Vincent's, and if he's not seeing people for smoking-related disease dying, they've got asbestosis mesothelioma from the Latrobe Valley. So I really see it as people who don't like the sight of wind turbines, which is a valid concern, but when compared to people who are dying in the Latrobe Valley and from lung diseases, I think it's. I think if there was an option that affected less people, I'd go with it. But wind turbines and solar are the best options for our future when you consider the available options.
Just on that point, can I just clarify? Is that Latrobe area the highest area in Australia of lung-related diseases?
Well, stats are roughly the same as the Hunter Valley stats.
Okay.
So it's 7 times the national incidence of cancer. So obviously that gentleman, this woman, and
I'd like to address the political and social will
yes.
aspect. I found it astonishing that the pilot project for solar power up in Wentworth, the promoters that are finding that they can't get finance because the 3 power supply companies in Australia won't buy the offtake.
Correct.
Now, it's great for you people to invent things, but if people aren't going to buy them, or the politicians aren't going to require the power supply companies to take a proportion and legislate if necessary, how are you ever going to get it into action?
Okay, well, I guess what I'm trying to achieve here, there's different parts of the debate, and in the past, people who either aren't up to date with the latest information or they're deliberately misleading us are trying to make it sound like there's a technological hurdle to get there. And so what I want to do with audiences and with our team is to go around the country and make sure we tick the box that there's no technological hurdle, so then we can shift the debate to how we're actually going to harness the will of the Australian people, because I know generally, and it's seen in survey outcomes, that something like 65% of the population like wind power and 85% like solar. Okay, so virtually nobody's against solar power. So then why isn't it happening? Well, I think that the coal and gas exporters see it's the thin edge of the wedge. If the Saudi Arabia of coal starts to run itself on renewables, what sort of signal will that send to our customers? So they prefer to put a bit of lobbying effort and marketing effort into making sure something like this doesn't eventuate. And we know it can, because in Germany they've got 30,000 megawatts of rooftop solar in a place that gets 50% of the power of if you put those same panels in Victoria. So in other words, we get buy one, get one free. And I've seen the My Christmas sale where people crawl over each other, to get buy one, get one free, and there's only a few on offer. Well, we've got millions of those. And the same goes for wind. In Denmark, they've got 20% capacity factor in their wind sites. That's the average across the country. And we get 35%. So it's buy one, get one free for wind here as well. So I guess our main reason for delivering these talks is to try and get more people on board, or to leave them informed, so that the next discussion that happens at dinner, or the next, or if you decide to get really involved and behind us, or form your own group to do that, is that we can actually say, well, actually the dollars of the big miners, the big coal and gas miners, aren't going to mean that the numbers of people, so it's like the dollars versus the numbers, the numbers of people are going to outweigh the dollars in terms of that lobbying effort. So I'm hoping that we'll do it that way. If you've got a better suggestion, I'll take it on board. But this is the aim of
get legislation in place. I mean, it seemed to be commercially viable. That it just astonished me that they were able to block it, because it wouldn't take.
Well, you've got in situ coal plants that are being built many years ago, so their marginal cost to generate, that you don't need to actually build they can write down the capital value of the coal plant, and all they need to pay is the operations and maintenance plus 10% profit. So you can't really compete that with a new capital plant. The interesting thing is that fuel, especially for gas, because gas is linked to international price parity, and gas is actually substituted for oil. So everyone's felt the pain at the petrol browser. Well, the pain at the petrol browser can translate into the light switch if we shift the electricity supply to gas. So that's not a very smart move. And unfortunately, that's where legislators are at right now. They're wanting to move us progressively towards gas. But I think we need to leapfrog that. It's right. It's a diversion, not a shortcut. Leapfrog that and go straight to renewables.
I thought the Liberals were saying there weren't going to be any wind farms from Warrnambool to the Prom. Isn't that was what they said?
Well, the actual legislation is that there's a planning amendment that allows effectively a veto anyone within 2 kilometres of wind turbine that's statewide. Once you get to the Prom, there's nowhere to put a wind farm anyway because there's no grid beyond there. Like once you get past, say, Bairnsdale, the grid's not going to support a wind farm.
Matthew, I can add to that. They've actually made exclusion zones as well. They've made it incredibly competitive in Victoria, basically,
Yeah.
the new plan regulation. So they've got exclusion zones. So
There's a couple
those
of-
areas that you just described.
There's a couple of
are probably all excluded, plus the 2 kilometre veto within a house. So they have Golden Springs wind turbines that went up. There are only 2. They wouldn't have gone ahead under the new planning regulations, even though it was a community scheme behind that, and they wanted that.
Yeah.
So they did go ahead because it was under the previous government.
Yeah, there's a few wind farms that have had to commence construction, and what they've done is they haven't really got their ducks lined up on finance, so they've gone and started bulldozing roads and things, so that they can maintain their planning permit, or else it would have rolled into needing to go through the process again, and that would have been the end of the project. So it's pretty disappointing, and there's just a couple of ministers, I think, in the Liberal National Coalition in Victoria who are just vehemently opposed to wind, but then I know lots of people, like former Senator, I remember her name in a second, from Liberal Victoria, she's really pro-wind. She's very good on refugee issues as well. I remember in a second, and I'll let you know, but there's quite a few Liberals who are pro-wind, but obviously not enough at the moment. Pro-advancing wind, you know, getting it up. But obviously the other ones are winning their way at the moment. Don?
Matthew, given that this is likely to occur, maybe not in the 10-year cycle, but inertial pressures will force it to happen.
Yes.
And what about, do you have technology to address the zero carbon aeroplane?
Yeah, so we're working on the transport plan. We're working on the transport plan at the moment by the end of the year. And I think 70% of our plane trips along the eastern seaboard. So our idea would be to replace that with a high-speed rail. At the moment, aviation is difficult. Most of the trials of using biofuels with aviation is another reason not to use biofuels in stationary energy, which is easily substituted by direct electricity generation. So you can imagine like 70% of the passenger kilometres are switched onto rail. We've solved that many, but you've still got a residual. And for a country like Australia, we're very much an island, so we at least have to fly to Singapore to get anywhere else. So the rest of, at the moment, I think that I can't quote the exact answer to that. The trials going on are with biofuels, but usually they're only willing to test one engine out of 4 on a Boeing 747 or an Airbus with biofuels. They won't power. I don't know of any flights yet that are all 4, or they've done blends, which is not the same answer. So there's definitely, although that said, I believe that planes that fly out of South Africa take Sasol or avgas on, which is made out of a process which can be biofuel based, but in the case of Sasol it's lignite. They make liquid fuels from coal. So if they can make synthesis fuels that are working in aeroplanes, then it obviously can be done. But again, you really want to reduce the number of passenger kilometres because biofuels will strip every tree from here to Sydney if you try and do what we do today with biofuels. So it's a difficult one. But I'll tell you one thing though, one area we hadn't had an answer for was cement manufacturing, and we now have one, the MIT technology that makes carbon as a byproduct that can be saleable, as well as cement. So it looks like pretty important cement. So since we started, we didn't have an answer for cement, and I think we do now.
Thank you. Just following on the gentleman's concern here, my brother happens to know Tony Abbott quite well.
Yes.
And he's sort of projecting direct action. So your group, are you feeling more comfortable if, and it's on the cards that he will get in at the next election, are you feeling more comfortable that you may get more ear sounding from Tony Abbott? Another thing too, I've come to few bombs have gone into geothermal technology, hot rock, hot fractured rock, and that's for various reasons. Primarily, they've spent a fortune on having quite got it right, and it's still batting away with it. So, how do you compare with a situation like that? And
I'm not confident that the Tony Abbott federal government is any more interested in going through renewables than the current Labor government, and the current Labor government isn't very interested either. So yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath there. I know I briefed Malcolm Turnbull multiple times. He's very keen on what we do. If you can get into Tony Abbott's ear with this, we'd be happy to debrief. I don't think it necessarily change them, but I'll try anything. And on the second question, which was the geothermal. Yeah, so geothermal is very much a nascent research project. Like, we don't have a product that you can buy off the shelf. So, for instance, they're using the world's biggest drill rig to do the deepest 5 to 7 kilometre wells. They have very expensive capital, and then they're not guaranteed they're going to get a return, and every single site that will exploit is its own research project, whereas with wind, you just need to back correlate a year or two of wind data with a near Met station, and then you know that you're going to come in with 10% of what your estimate was. So bank's happy with that, but every single geological area, the strata is different, and they can not get return on their water, all sorts of things. So the risk's much higher. It's a long way away, and the temperatures are really low. So it's like warm water in the desert. So it's warm water very far away from the grid. And when I say warm water, the exit temperatures are like 190 degrees. You need an organic Rankine cycle that costs 3 times as much to be able to extract electrical energy out of that. And you also have local drawdowns. So after a while, the temperatures drop down there, and you need to do your next bunch of wells. It doesn't recharge as fast as that. There's some other approaches which are like wet aquifers, which are a bit better because they recharge faster, but I'm not that bullish on it. And the actual Energy Institute was originally set up because of the boom in thinking around geothermal options and the potential on the Latrobe Valley. And so the head of the Energy Institute who has the partnership with us is Professor Mike Sandiford, and he's a professor geologist, and he's pretty much in my camp. They originally were all very excited, but they thought it's too very challenging with economic something.
How about the carbon capture and storage? What's going on about that?
It's a bit of a long discussion, but I'll just say don't confuse a PR campaign for a technology in terms of. Okay.
One other point from all of you told us, there is a hope. At the moment, we lay people don't know of these great things.
Yes.
You need a source of information. We need to be educated. It's a wonderful thing we have, but we're ignorant, and we will support it. At the moment, the other pressure groups are persuading us that the status quo is for now and the future. Is there anything being done about that?
Well, this is the approach I have at the moment, is to try and train up as many people to go and give talks, or to get people who have some expertise to contribute or want to help us to write the next research project, or eventually to update this so it's a better, more concrete, hopefully lower cost document, or we might find we underprice some stuff, but basically we want to make a more and more concrete case until the point that till all the politics lines up. They want to go ahead, and of course the government's done no planning, so hopefully they can take our scenario off the shelf and they can use that as the basis for the planning they do, because otherwise I'll be starting from scratch. And the idea, and we've already achieved it because UNSW copied us. If we can get other universities also to write their own scenarios, then the more people thinking about it means that by the time we're ready to go, it'll be cheaper. That's our thinking.
Just to follow on from Keith, Keith has been talking at length with the current president of the Australian Institution of Engineers. And David Hood, the current president, is very much a sustainability activist. And he is now starting to drive this into the political arena to give a better voice than is probably coming from Matthew's direction. But also, he mentioned one of the supporters here in Robin Batterham. In fact, Robin Batterham, we see him in church occasionally. He plays the organ from time to time at the Presbyterian over the road, and he has been a guest organist here. But he is still the chair of the Australian Academy of Sciences and Technological Engineering. And I, being a fellow of that organisation and also of the Institute of Engineers, you'd be surprised at the amount of data that is now coming through the email on a daily basis, inviting us to just talk to that talk, or awareness of the technologies that Matthew is espousing here today. And I believe that the cost cycle will rise rapidly as we bring in carbon tax. And I foretell, in fact, that it'll probably cost more to administer the carbon tax than it's worth. And the price for the solar must come down just simply because of the way we have seen electronics come down enormously. And it is on the same curve. So somewhere along the line in the not too near future, those curves will cross and commercial values will cause the politicians to think that, well, we've just invented solar power. And I see that day arriving. And until that occurs, there's going to be a little chance that we can convince the politicians to break away from those big commercial institutions that are driving them to stay as it is. But the people power from organisations like this will eventually win. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like you to congratulate